Um, Both in See at the Club and Trauma, a couple of your recent singles, you
Yeah.
mentioned police brutality and police issues. Um, can you tell me sort of about your history and dealing with that in your lyrics?
Well, definitely. Honestly, since our second album, Zingalamaduni, I think that's probably the first time I started to express on record, at least, the whole issue with police and just the abuse of power, and also the abuse of trust. That um, has unfortunately been a historical fact and theme in this country, and especially with police towards black people. It's been a long standing reality that is a gashing sore that needs to be properly diagnosed and then dealt with. You know what I mean? So it's a long standing issue. And so yeah, I started talking about it on our second album, Zingalamaduni, I believe, and then from there, I started picking back up on it a lot conversationally in my music, in my lyrics on this new record. Well, probably the last two records, because we released two albums last month. This Was Never Home is the For Pay album, and we did a free album called Changing the Narrative. And so both of those records, I deal with it, changing the narrative on the song "I Don't See You at the Club," you know what I mean? And then on "This Was Never Home," songs like "Trauma," you know, tackles one aspect of this whole reality of brutality and abuse of power. Yeah.
Well, they're both great albums. I'm glad you were able to get into some some deeper issues on them, man. It's
Yeah.
really
Thank you.
needed.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I really appreciate that. We all do. We're excited about it. I mean, it's music that, you know, in this day and time, there's so little uh, hip hop that addresses really any actual issues of deep worth.
Yeah.
uh, so our music is one of those, styles of music that used to be a tradition in hip hop and has broken tradition in a mainstream way. And my hope and my prayer is that our music could become part of the conversation again. So like in a huge way, and in a small way, in a microscopic way, it's already doing that. But we want it to be in the mainstream again, so that it's part of the conversation like it was in the '90s for us.
I want the same things for you, man.
I appreciate that, Josh. Yeah,
Do you have any personal experiences with police things that you've come up with and had to deal with yourself?
yeah, numerous times. For me personally, even back in the '90s, we were Headliner and I were driving on an interview with, I think it was maybe Rolling Stone or something like this, and no, that was with racism in general. Let me come up with something. Let me remember something with the police. I was in Tennessee with my wife. We were driving, sort of giving her a historical tour of my life in Tennessee and stuff like this, and police officers stopped me. And this happens pretty frequently. I've been stopped numerous times just because I was black, I believe, because I wasn't speeding, and I do own a Porsche. It's a nice little convertible silver Porsche, and Boxster. And I think that they assumed that I was either a drug dealer or something, but just getting stopped. But see, this for me, this is a very it's a thing that me and a lot of my friends have had to accept as part of the landscape of being in America as a black person. So they'd stop me, I'm always very polite. So I haven't had any literal physical abuse. Um, I always try to turn down the sort of the tension that unfortunately tends to exist. But I try to turn it down by nature because I know I'm very acute on history. And so I know the realities of what has happened in the present and in the past in this country just because of a disagreement that can turn into a death. And so I don't want to be one of those statistics. And so, yeah, so that's one of the situations that I can remember right now. Even here in my hometown of Fayetteville, I've been stopped numerous times by the police here. And many of them have gotten to know me by now because it's a small town where I live. But again, for no apparent reason. And this is the things that I talk about in my songs. But even like in trauma, I'm talking about my own experience, but also the experience of so many of our people who are just literally whose lives are stopped because of this interaction, which is just some of the deepest of injustice that you can think of.
I don't think a lot of people, especially people who've never had encounters with the police, I don't think they realize how undignifying it can be to an individual just to have to go through that, just to have somebody profile you like that and mark you out as a certain kind of person and judge you before they've ever even met you. It's a very profound experience and not a good one.
It is, and Josh, not only that, even this is what happens in my family, and I think it happens in many black families, is that we have to have discussions with. I have a 21-year-old son. He's tall, he's dark skinned, he dresses, in my opinion, non-intimidating. But even the fact that I have to speak about how he dresses, how tall he is, how dark he is a reality of the black American experience where we have to talk to our kids about how to respond to police because the implication is that the police are going to see you as a threat. And this is without you doing anything. One example is my son was with some of his friends who happened to be white. And my son and daughter, they were walking through the woods. I live out in a rural area. They were walking through the woods. And it was about five of them. Two were black, three were white. The other black was my daughter. And the police, the neighbors had called the police on our children. So, and their friends. And so when the police show up, and this is the part that I feel is so problematic, the first person they address was who? My son. Now there's five of them there. My son and the other white brothers, kids, were around the same age. So why single out my son as the first person that they're going to talk to? And if he wasn't trained by us to respond in a certain way, we could have lost our son. And I don't use that as just a theory. It's just based on the situations that have happened far too many times in this country. We've come to that logical and educated guess or conclusion that there's a good chance that I could lose my son if the wrong interaction or if a tense interaction with police happen. And I don't think that most families have to think about that reality to the extent that black families do. And we talk about this often. The other thing that's when you talk about emotional stress or trauma, like my song describes, there is a feeling as a black person in this country many times that just our existence in certain areas is by nature already a a a signal of threat. And that is very taxing on you emotionally. It's taxing on your patriotism. It's taxing on your feeling of belonging. Your feeling of this is my home. This is where I belong. When just by you being who you are, before you've spoken any words, before you've done anything wrong, that there's a feeling of fear and threat. And that weighs very heavily on the spirit. And on the spirit of, I'm sorry I'm talking so long.
No, no.
A lot of these things are really real. So it's like even the spirit of how much you can accomplish in this country, the spirit of how far you can soar, how much you can spread your wings in this country, how much you can dream. These things have an effect indirectly and subconsciously in a very real way as a person of color in this country.
I hear you, man. I see this all the time. Like the statistics to me are real because I follow these stories and I see what happens and I watch these videos. And there's an intrinsic um, underlying thing there. When you're black, it changes the game. The police are
Yeah,
dangerous to everybody, but there's an
exactly,
extra layer there when you're black. That there's
without a
some
doubt.
assumptions going on that are not in your favor.
Yeah. And so that's a tough thing. Listen, I've had run-ins with the police that have been very positive, where I was speeding, I was doing something that was illegal, and you know, they were very nice and they were very good. But again, there's this underlying feeling that, and my kids have it too, is that when you run into a problem with the police, whether it's legitimate or illegitimate or perceived either which way, that it could become deadly. And I think that needs to become so much of a part of our American past, that it should not exist in 2016, and it should have no part in the narrative of any citizen in this country.
Agreed fully.
Yeah.
Um, a little bit ago, you were talking about spirit. I know that you're involved in the ministry and stuff. In the past, I've talked a lot about how I don't believe that Christianity and the values of the police state coincide very well. I think that Christianity is sort of a value-driven religion and stuff, and not one of authority and outside stuff and violence and abuse. What are your thoughts on Christianity and the police state?
Well, I think that, it's ironic because to some extent, Christianity from the very beginnings with Christ in the first century in Rome, in that setting, there was also a very weird police state. And there was also a very oppressive state amongst the Jewish people from the Roman Empire. And Jesus himself had to find himself um, existing, preaching, trying to expose the evils of this world and the forgiveness of God in that setting of a very oppressive Roman reality, and not only an oppressive Roman reality, but Jesus faced the extended pressure of a very oppressive religious reality too, because a lot of the religious were the ones that would insist upon Jesus's execution. So um, I think that it has always, Christianity has always been, from its very beginnings to now, opposed to any type of oppression. And that's what I feel sort of the purpose of Christianity is when it comes to this whole issue of police brutality. It's against obviously this overreach and this environment, this environment of sort of police against the citizen. It's against that whole viewpoint. It's supposed to be police's role is supposed to be to protect and to serve, and that whole concept of serving, I think, has been lessened, and this idea of police against the society has been heightened, and I think it needs to be reversed, where police are the role of police is to serve us and not to be us against them type of thing.
Yeah, you and your when you talk about activism a lot, both in interviews and in your music, you often talk about bringing it back to the community level.
Yes.
And I felt the same way about policing in general. There's kind of a split faction among us police critics, and there's the accountability sect, who are just trying to seek accountability, and then I'm part of the abolish police. Because I think that we can do better in our communities to find new solutions that don't involve, you know, um, men with guns coming to deal with every situation. We can use people that can calmly, help two different disputing parties resolve issues and stuff and other things. What do you think are some things that communities could do to sort of switch up the tactics of traditional policing?
I think it's a great thought. I've never thought of the abolish police thing. I think that that's something I'd love to just learn more about and understand more about that, even that whole thought process. But I think that from a community standpoint, I've always been big on people who have the most interest in a in some result or in some outcome. So in other words, we want to have peace in our communities. Well, the people in that community have the most interest in getting that result. We want peace. We want um, there to be less violence, less violence, and we want more peace. So the people in that community always have the most interest in attaining that goal. So to me, those are always going to be the people that should be communicated with to try to accomplish that goal, the people that are held the most accountable to try to accomplish that goal. So in that way, I do agree with what you're saying as far as the community is the most important activist in getting to that goal, even above anybody who's outside of that community that just is over that community or in charge of that community. The community itself has the most to gain. And so I always tend, my music, especially my lyrics, tend to speak to the people at hand that have the most to gain from a certain, result or a certain outcome. They have the most to gain, and they're the ones that have to stand up the most. I'm not I'm not at a place yet where I would want to exclude someone being in charge of a certain community or over a certain community, but it's hard to depend on them to do the right thing. At the end of the day, I would rather try to inspire and encourage or rebuke the actual community that has the most to gain, because they're the ones that have the most interest or should have the most interest in a different result and in an amazing outcome. So I tend to talk straight to the horse's mouth in a sense. And I tend to also be against putting too much trust, too much weight onto someone else who just simply does not have as much to gain. They have less interest in seeing the peace result or the nonviolence result as you and the community do. So I always tend to speak straight to the community.
Yeah, we tend to. A lot of times, this narrative gets taken into what's going to be done at the national level, and I think it's more important to ask what we're going to do in our communities. What does our communities need for protection and safety, and how do we address it without adopting some kind of blanket policy that may not work in our community?
Right. And I agree with that. And I think that, you know, there's a lot of issues that need to be addressed and trying to heal the community enough so that they can become active and deeply involved with what's going on in their own midst. Other things need to be addressed with helping the community heal from some of the gashes and bruises that have happened over time in history. Communities don't just pop out of nowhere. They're built on a historical precedence. And unfortunately, a lot of times in our country, we want to ignore history and deal with the present. But in doing that, we are missing the point that the present is based on history. And so we've got to deal with some of the root issues that can help us to healthily diagnose what is the real problem, what is the root of the problem, and then start to heal. So there is some steps, that I believe have to happen for a community, or at least for the black community, to truly represent itself in the best way so that everyone can really be involved in helping to find solutions. There's a lack of unity a lot of times in our communities that make it very hard to have a healthy accountability, if you know what I mean. So.
Yeah, this is something that I recognize in large is that oftentimes people these issues go unnoticed until there's a very clear case of outrage, and people respond well to outrage. But there's the bigger problems are sort of that if you weigh them, all together, the little things every day, the little abuses against people that happen, and those add up to weigh a lot. But since there's no outrage involved, they don't get addressed, and it's hard to get any group or community or anything to kind of come together and speak of these things without having something massive really to latch onto.
Right. And then when we're using this term community, what it can be loosely used, like the term love or all types of terms that are loosely used. But a real community has a general sort of thought process or goal that they're trying to accomplish in that community. There's a spirit that they're trying to accomplish in that community. There's got to be some unity in thought in any community in order to really truly call it a community. Otherwise, you're just neighbors, but you're not neighborly. You
Mm-hmm.
just live in the same area, but you all have totally different goals and you're not united. So I think that a community definitely has to have a purpose of what they're hoping to accomplish. And and so again, I think that those types of things need to be addressed as well, where if you are indeed a community coming together to determine what you're striving to accomplish in that community is very important to actually come into that result. You got to know what result you're trying to bring about. It doesn't mean that you're united on every single thought and every single thing, but some general points of what the community is out to accomplish. What are we striving to do in this community? I think needs to be something that's addressed a lot more in this country, um, in various communities, and especially the communities that have some of the most risk of brutality, some of the most risk of abuse of power. I think that there needs to be conversations in that community as to what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, silence itself is a community decision that leads to apathy that helps
Exactly
these
right.
problems grow more.
Yeah, I agree.
And speaking about the community, you sort of recognized it as it being its own sort of living entity.
Yeah.
That's where I've come to the abolish the police thing from. Is even there's some scientific theory and stuff called living systems theory, and what it shows is that large institutions and systems themselves eventually, just because their structures have their own needs and stuff, they sort of have their own agendas. They work better when maintained or what in a certain way, and so any living system like a policing or government itself is itself its own entity.
Sure. I
And sort of the trouble with accountability then is that that's basically asking that entity to look after us over itself, whereas any kind of living system or entity is going to take on its own needs and desires, and
exactly right. Yes.
so
Yeah. I totally understand that. And while I'm not sure because I haven't studied it and thought about it as much as you have, while I'm not sure if I could say, I'm great with abolishing police forces, I am very secure with saying that the community is the most important aspect with bringing about the results of having a peaceful neighborhood and having accountability within your neighborhood. And to be honest, back in the day, and this is what I love about some of my upbringing in my community back in when I was younger in Tennessee, it was like that. We would hold each other accountable. So if I was acting up, the neighbors could hold me accountable and talk to my grandmama about me and vice versa. And there was this sense of community pride as to what we're trying to accomplish. And it wasn't necessarily that there was meetings or anything held. What are we trying to accomplish as a community? There was just cultural understandings about what was right, what was wrong, what was not going to be tolerated, what is tolerated. There was some understanding, and it didn't come from governmental systems. It came from within the community. And that was healthy because we were able to hold one another accountable. We knew one another in a personal way, and it was helpful for keeping things in line. During my youth, at this time period in Tennessee, I literally can't remember an instance where there was police interaction. We dealt with things, you know, with one another. And there was issues that had to be dealt with. It wasn't like there was just perfect peace. It wasn't. But these issues were dealt with one another, and we came to some great solutions. So I think that it's important to
Yeah,
deal with.
it's a great thing when you deal with things like that. You're not stuck with like a rigid system of dealing with something. You can deal with it on a one-on-one basis. You know, with the actual individuals involved, and a community can do that, knowing the individual and their history and like those strengths and weaknesses, and having understanding and forgiveness and all these things that are necessary to actually keep peace.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. You know, unfortunately, some of the biggest gangs that are still in existence today, Crips, Bloods, so on and so forth, started off as groups that were there to protect the community from brutality. And it was police brutality, it was systematic brutality that was based on racist concepts and white supremacist concepts as well, supremacist concepts. So these types of abuses of power over the history of this country has started the need for some for some of these communities to literally create um, their own sort of protection agencies, but against the system itself as
Mhm.
opposed to against others in the community. And it's really sad. And then when someone understands that history, it does cause to question um, number one, the serious impacts of racism in this country and what that has caused, and some of the sort of the some of the, what it's caused, but it also causes you to think about really relying more on the community itself to do more of the action instead of relying on the system that actually unfortunately bore some of these atrocities of gangs and so on and so forth, even drug dealing and so on and so forth. A lot of the things that really impact our community as blacks, it's like, and people of color, it's like a lot of that started from the same oppression of the system.
Yeah, even hip hop itself, came out of a sort of era in the 70s when these gangs realized their need to not just protect their neighborhood, but protect, their larger communities in a whole, and started, instead of fighting each other, came together to sort of battle against police and oppression. And out of that sort of, agreement and good faith and stuff, the entire hip hop culture developed. So, I mean, it was a really, really great thing, both politically, artistically, and socially.
Yeah, I think when we talk about, like, with that system and with that statement, when we talk about the police, to me, the police are simply an extension of a system and a country, and even before the system, a frame of mind that was based on racism and illegitimized anyone who wasn't a white male. And the system was set up by the same frame of mind that would then put into effect this same frame of thought throughout the governmental system, throughout the business sectors of this governmental system, and the way that the government would help businesses, why they would do what they did, the way laws were built, the way the police were enacted to enforce those laws. So the police is just, for me, one aspect of a huger issue that just needs to be, again, diagnosed and then healed. And whether that will really change what you're calling the police state, I don't know. Again, like I said, I think I lean more towards communities doing or having the most responsibility to do the best for their community. But I do know that things would be a whole lot better if we could address some of the root uh, problems that are within the DNA of America when it comes to race and how this country was built based upon some extremely faulty thoughts about race and some extremely oppressive and horrible situations, that came from those thoughts.
Yeah, there's a lot of faulty and sort of malign premises that we're working from here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Um, so, what do you think about groups like yourself and other hip hop groups or whatever teaming up with activist groups, like when you're on tour, having like Black Lives Matter or CopBlock or these kind of groups kind of come with you and talk and speak with your audience and stuff? Is do you think that that's a way to maybe help get the message out to bring activism and music together in a more fundamental way?
It's funny because since our beginnings, um, we've always welcomed various groups to come in and set up tables at our shows and be able to pass out information, really to inform people about some of the problems that our music tries to address. So um, we're big proponents of having various organizations get involved, be able to have their say. We're choosy on how we curate and sort of think about who's best fits our general philosophy, so that we're not confusing the snot out of our audience. But at the same time, um, we believe in that, Josh, because it is important to use as many mediums as we can to try to get information out, really to empower the people. That's really at the end of the day what I'm all about and what our group is about. We want to empower people to make more healthy and more peaceful decisions that bring about great results in this country, and in the world, really. We believe music is so powerful. It overcomes so many obstacles and it reaches past so many walls in this world that even politics and even religion are not as effective in doing. So we feel like we have an opportunity to raise the awareness, raise the level of understanding about some of the issues that are going on. So yeah, we're always in favor of doing things like that.
How can an activist who maybe wants to, set up stuff at your shows and stuff, how should they contact you through your management or?
Definitely, yeah. You contact through us. Our website is extremely interactive, adtheband.com, and we respond. And not only that, we're extremely interactive even on our Facebook page, our Instagram. I mean, it's like we're very touchable in a sense. And so people that are interested in doing that, talk to us. Let's talk and let's see what we can do, because we're very big on community activism and ground level grassroots activism.
Great. I'll leave the links for all that so that people can get in touch with you. And
Yeah,
if you ever get
adtheband.com. Yeah. Or Facebook is Arrested Development. It's the one with the little, there's a few different fake Arrested Developments on Facebook. So it's the one with the sackcloth logo. And then we also, on Instagram, it's adtheband.com. On Twitter, it's adtheband.com.
excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I hope to see you at one of these shows someday. So,
Man, you got to come through, brother. And you said you're in Iowa?
uh-huh. I'm pretty
Okay.
close
I
to
don't know if
St. Louis and Chicago, and so I would.
we're going to Chicago soon. But follow us on our website, and I'd love for you to shoot through and peep us out, enjoy some music, but also we can build and talk.
That'd be great, man. I would look
No
forward to
doubt.
that. All right. So one last question for this segment. What are some of your personal favorite police critical jams?
Um, I like KRS One, Sound of the Police. I love that joint. I love. I think our joint sort of like I don't see it at the club is a great tune, and I think Trauma. And the reason I say some of our joints is that I like to give the balance of it all. So it's like it's critical of the parts about police that need to be criticized. So it's not like demonizing anybody, because I understand police are human beings just like everybody else is. But I like what you talked about a minute ago, where it talked about the very system that they have to perform within, um, sort of limits the ability to actually accomplish the goal in great ways sometimes. And many times in our community in particular, I'm aware of the many times that it's wrong. And so in like songs like I Don't See You at the Club, we address that. You know what I'm saying? Like we address the complexities of the issue and at the same time critiquing it harshly like it deserves to be. And songs like Trauma to me put it in the context of police brutality, but also this context of this ongoing trauma that people of color, and in particular black people who have had a very unique experience in America and a very unique sort of story in America, have been under this hotbed of just consistent back-to-back problems that we've had to face ever since we've been here. It's not been a time of peace for us just yet. We're hoping to get there, you know what I'm saying? But that song and the title Trauma, I think brings a very, it brings a critique to the problems of police, but also it brings a human, a very human perspective about how it affects people. And I think that's what sometimes gets left out of the argument or the debate about police brutality, is how it's affecting people. And on a human level, the trauma that it causes, but not just police brutality, but all the other things I talk about in that song. So I think it puts it in a great context of this overwhelming problem and police brutality as being one of the branches of it, you know? And so those are some of my favorite protest joints, if I could think of them right now.
I'm with you. I'm with you, man.
One other song is one of ours. It's United Minds of America on Zingalama Duty album. And it talks about sort of that role that the brutality that the police bring to the communities at times, how bad of a role it plays in the community. So yeah, those are some songs that I could think of right off that, you know.
We'll be linking to all of those songs at the website so that everyone can hear them. All right. Well, from everyone at CopBlock and our audience and everything, thanks for taking the time out to talk to us and share your thoughts and address some of these issues. We're very excited about this and we really appreciated it.
No, Josh, I really appreciate you bringing me on. I appreciate the love for the music. You know, it means the world to us to be able to create music that, again, creates a dialogue, inspires the spirit, the human spirit, and hopefully inspires people to feel empowered that they can get in there and speak their voice, let their voice be heard, and make some change in their own way. So I'm very happy that the song inspired you to reach out to me and we could talk. You know what I mean?
Me too.